And most of us don't want to go through this process of really, truly becoming. And the becoming is when you get slapped upside a wall, the wind gets knocked out of you. What are you going to settle for? How are you going to ascend? How do you go to the next level? How do you ascend? And Jesus is tempted 3 temptations. 1, turn the stones to bread. I will sin based off of what I do. Throw yourself off the temple. Everyone's going to see you. Angels will come in and save you. I'm going to sin based off of what people think about me. Or I bow down. I'll give you all this, and I will sin based upon what I have: my car, my house, my retirement. And so many times we get to that point where we have a decision to make. Am I going to continue to move forward and ascend the way that Christ ascended, which is through humility and a cross? Am I going to do that? Or am I going to ascend based off of what I do? Because what I do has got me to where I'm at right now.
Welcome to the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast. I really hope this episode helps you learn and master the skills you need to grow your leadership effectiveness and enjoyment. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to get notified as soon as I post a new session so you don't miss a single episode. I'd also greatly appreciate any reviews, likes, and shares that you can give me. It just helps me extend my reach to more people. So leaders, I know just how frustrating it can feel when you're in the weeds of work or ministry and life is chaotic, you're struggling to feel effective, and you're just not enjoying leadership as much as you could be. And so to help you, after many years of leadership and executive coaching, I've developed a framework called the Christian Leader Blueprint that'll guide you to find clarity in your life and leadership. It'll help you gain a better rhythm of life. It'll help you see yourself more clearly, to leverage your strengths, and you'll produce more productive relationships. It's a step-by-step guide to leadership transformation. And I have that in 2 formats now. I have a free short guide that you can find on ryanfranklin.org, and I have a book, The Christian Leader Blueprint. And you can find that in any format, including an audiobook, wherever you buy your books. I have a few more things on my website that you may be interested in, so just head on over to ryanfranklin.org and check it all out. And now, let's get to our session. Welcome to the Christian Leader Made Simple show. I'm your host, Ryan Franklin, and today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Eugene Wilson. Eugene is an accomplished author and speaker with a passion for leadership development. He has written a ton of books, 2 of which are required reading for ministerial licensure. But he recently released a brand new book called Next Level Leader, which gives us insight to help elevate a person's leadership. And he emphasizes the importance of being stretchable and resilient and managing chaos and leadership roles. And this is something that most all of us could use help with. And we're going to dive into that in just a moment. But his work is deeply rooted in biblical principles, which makes it very much relevant for pastors and really any Christian leader. He has an extensive background in ministry. He's currently the president of Texas Bible College, and he has served in a large variety of pastoral leadership capacities over the years, including senior pastor. So Dr. Eugene Wilson, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here today and looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate you coming on. I'm excited about this new book. Has it, I know by the time this is released, it will have been put out, but is it currently available for sale right now?
It is, yes. It came out, I think it was last week was the first day. So I'm excited. I'm always excited. Every book I write, I'm excited. I'm trying to write another one right now. I've got another one that I'd like to be writing right now. Actually, 2 or 3 others I would like to be writing. And I love to write. I love to get the information out there. I love to connect with people. And I'm very excited about Next Level Leader. So we'll see what happens with all of it.
How many books have you written so far?
Well, this far that's in print, 9. And I've got another one that's actually completed, but we're holding off on publishing it. And I've got another one that's a little short version of kind of like going back to my first book, Realign. And it's kind of like a play off of it. I haven't done anything with that one yet. So I just say 9. and hopefully
what
10 by the end of the year.
What would you say outside of Next Level Leader? Obviously, that's your passion right now. What would you say has been the most influential book that you've published so far?
Oh man, that's difficult. That's difficult. I asked the guy one time. I said, "What is your favorite cheesecake?" He had a little restaurant with cheesecake. He had over like 100 recipes, and he said, "Man," he said, "That's like asking me which one's my favorite child." So I don't know, man.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Fair enough. And I guess in answering that, Realign was the first book. It's required reading to get your general license. It's translated in multiple languages. 70 is my second book. Probably 70 is the most influential. I had a friend of mine read it. He was the vice president of Northrop Grumman, subcontractor for the Defense Department. He said, "I don't get the church stuff." He'd been an atheist for 19 years. He said, "I don't get the church stuff." He said, "But that is the best leadership book I've ever read in my life." And he's a Harvard grad, all kinds of degrees. And he was just blown away by it. The executive producer of Daystar bought my book, heard me speak at a business thing in Dallas a few years back. And she said, "Man," she said, "that is the hands down the best book I've ever read on leadership." So that book,
wow.
But my personal favorite probably is The Difference Maker. It's just straight from my heart. I love the stories. I love to tell stories. I got to write stories. And then last year I released the 5 Reasons Churches Thrive. That was a fable. And that was
Which was
fun
tremendous,
to write.
by the way. Yeah, I enjoyed that book.
That book was fun to write. I so enjoyed writing that book. So I don't know.
I love the way that I love the fable part of it. You were able to bring a different spin to leadership and make it creative and enjoyable.
And I love Patrick Lencioni's books. I didn't try to copy
That's what I was thinking of.
His 5. My brain just went out the window. His book on 5, whatever it was. I wasn't trying. I love Patrick Lencioni, and I can't even remember his title is, but 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Right.
And that was the book that made him famous. And I love that book. I wasn't even thinking about it when I wrote the 5 Reasons Churches Thrive. That actually came out of a conversation with my mentor. And he said, "What are the 4 or 5 things that you feel that every church needs to hear?" And this is probably 15 years ago. And I went 1, 2, 3, 4. He goes, "Well, what about this?" I go, "Oh yeah, that too." And that really became the premise for my first book, Realign. That was the completion of my doctorate in strategic leadership from Regent University. And so I thought, man, I need to repackage all of that and break it down where it's very, very applicable. And so that was my attempt with 5 Reasons. And of course, personally, rhythm was a big deal. And I wrote Rhythm. That was my personal pursuit to be a little bit more productive with what time I have. And if I had not written that book, there is zero chance that I could have been the executive pastor and president of Texas Bible College and all my traveling and all the things I do. There was zero chance I could have done all of that for a course of a year and a half if I had not written Rhythm. Rhythm helped me grow. And then so it was actually a pursuit of mine just to grow. And I just dove into it. And then I thought, oh, maybe someone else would like to read this. And I decided to put it into a book. And I probably refer back to that book personally. That book and 70 are probably the 2 that I personally refer back to just to glean from in my daily life. So anyway, that's a long answer.
I have not read 70, but it sounds like I need to. So I will definitely, I'll definitely go get that.
There's a story in it, and I won't give it away. I'll just let you read it. But there is a story, and maybe at some point in time we can meet up, and I'll tell you the background to the story that I tell in the book. There's more details, and I can tell you more of those details, and it's pretty wild. It was a God thing. I'll just say it that way. It was literally a God thing. God gave me a dream, and out of the dream was Scripture. And actually, I'll just say this much. My dream was that I got a phone call from a friend saying, "Hey, this is just giving you a heads up. You'll get the formal invitation later, but you're going to be speaking at General Conference." And hung up the phone, and I'm like, "Oh man, this is crazy. I've never wanted to speak at General Conference. It's cool, but I've never been a drive." And I'm like, what am I going to preach? And instantly the Lord spoke and said, "Preach about Moses and Elijah, how they had a lot in common." And my dream ended. And so the next morning I'm thinking, Moses and Elijah, they have a lot in common. I mean, I would think Moses and Joshua would have a lot in common, and Elijah and Elisha would have a lot in common, but not Moses and Elisha. And later that morning, my brother-in-law, I was laughing about it. He goes, well, they were on Mount Transfiguration together. And I went, oh, I forgot about that. So over the course of several weeks, the Lord started speaking to me. I started diving into it. So that's a little bit of a picture of where 70 came from. There's more to it, though.
I'll have to get cool. it and dive into it. Sounds like a great book.
Oh, thank you.
Well, let's jump into the topic today. You wrote a brand new book, Next Level Leader. Tell us why you wrote this book.
2 reasons. One, I had just stepped into a new position as a president of Texas Bible College. And I began noticing that in life, as I've moved from position to position and different roles and responsibilities, I assisted my father after I graduated from Bible college. I went on to be a senior pastor. I was full-time as a family pastor, served as an executive pastor. And then I'm stepping into a new role as president of Texas Bible College. And I just began noticing, here are some things that I've noticed at every level. These are things that just seem to be consistent every time that, and when I say level, I'm not necessarily talking about, that you're moving up the ladder. I mean, if God's calls you to be whatever it is, don't try to move. I mean, that's the ultimate. My dad taught me that if God calls you to be a garbage man, don't stoop to be the president of the United States. And the same thing is true. If God calls you to be, I served as an executive pastor for 8 years. If God calls you to be an executive pastor, and that's what you're called to do, then don't try to be a senior pastor. I mean, you're so fulfilling God's call. So when I say next level, I'm not talking about moving up the corporate ladder or the ministerial ladder. I'm just saying that when God places you in new roles and new responsibilities, you're going to experience chaos. You're going to have to grow. I mean, a list goes on. And that was the whole thing of the next level leader. And if you can do that successfully, then God may move you like he did Joseph from Potiphar's household to the prison, to the throne or the palace. And in doing so, it was so interesting that he prospered in Potiphar's household. He prospered in the prison. But there was levels of responsibility. So he's being stretched at each level. And then all of a sudden, God places him responsibility. So I know I've been stretched repeatedly. And so anytime that I step into a new role, and there'll be something else, God, there'll come a time that I won't always be the president of Texas Bible College. And whatever that is, I'm pretty certain I'll be stretched. I'll go through a new learning curve, And so once you start to see those things and understand it, then it gives a little bit of comfort that you're not going crazy. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a freight train coming through. There actually is light. You can get through it. And anyway,
well, that's that subject of stretchable. That's what you cover in your first chapter of the book, and it. I was thinking in my mind, I play racquetball and go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, but I'm 44. The older I get, the less stretchable I feel. Is there any correlation to that in the world of leadership and in regards to age and, things of that nature?
I definitely think that beyond a shadow of a doubt, I don't really cover this in the book as far as a direct confrontation of the concept, but it's definitely there. And that is that you can't stop growing. You can't stop, changing. Mm. And so there is a certain amount of it that we kind of seem to settle. And that really comes out, that particular focus comes out in another chapter where I talk about do, but don't forsake becoming. And that's where I really drive home this concept that we can't settle. And I share a big part of a research project done by a Dr. J. Robert Clinton. And this is in the 1980s, 1990s. And Dr. J. Robert Clinton researched 1,200 church leaders. And he found that only 1/3 of those church leaders finished well. And so I'm reading a dissertation by some doctoral student. It's like nearly 200 pages. And I start reading, and I read about—
Who does that? Who does that?
The nerd. The nerd.
Well, I'm glad that you did it, and you can filter the information to us.
I was doing Iowa, not Iowa. I did that one too, but it was Wisconsin. I did the Wisconsin midwinter camp meeting, and I did the first night, and then I did a day session with pastors. And Rick Gonzalez is preaching the second night, and he hears me on 2 different weekends. We traveled 3 different weekends, and he hears me on 2 of them where I said, now, I'm getting ready to share this research, and I'm sharing this, as part of my message. And I said, I'm a nerd when it comes to this. So he gets up and makes a statement, and he can't remember my name. And he goes, and someone in the front row is going like, Eugene Wilson. He goes, the nerd. And so I am now the nerd. So I'm in his phone. I'm the nerd. Everything is about the nerd. So
I've been called a nerd a few times as well, but I don't frequently read dissertations.
Well, I got into this one, and I did it. I made it to like 30 pages or so, and then I at that point I've got tears running down my face. It's like it grabs me, and I'm going like, this is crazy. I reread it over and over again, and out of his research has come other guys, Emotionally Healthy Church, Pete, whatever his last name is. His stuff comes out of this guy's research. There's all kinds of things that we would know about today that can be traced back. Books is what I'm talking about. They can be traced back to Dr. J. Robert Clinton's research. And what he found was that there are 4 stages of life that most of us as ministers, we travel through fairly well, but there's only 1/3 that ever move on to stage 5 and 6. And stage 5 is convergence. It's where everything, your background, your experience, the ups and downs, the good, the bad, all these things, your maturity, your skill set, all things you developed, what God's called you to be, all that now converges at this moment in time that you begin to function at a higher level than you ever have. Everything has meaning now. It all comes together. Wow. And he says only 1/3 get there. And the reason is because stage 4 is a stage in which you transition from a focus on doing to actually being. And most of us don't want to go through this process of really, truly becoming. And the becoming is when you get slapped upside a wall, the wind gets knocked out of you. What are you going to settle for? How are you going to ascend? How do you go to the next level? How do you ascend? And Jesus is tempted 3 temptations. 1, turn the stones to bread. I will sin based off of what I do. Throw yourself off the temple. Everyone's going to see you. Angels will come in and save you. I'm going to sin based off of what people think about me. Or I bow down. I'll give you all this, and I will sin based upon what I have: my car, my house, my retirement. And so many times we get to that point where we have a decision to make. Am I going to continue to move forward and ascend the way that Christ ascended, which is through humility and a cross? Am I going to do that? Or am I going to ascend based off of what I do? Because what I do has got me to where I'm at right now.
So before we continue on with the podcast, this episode is brought to you by Christian Leader Community Coaching. Are you a Christian leader who is overwhelmed by the complexity of trying to figure out how to grow your team? I want to introduce to you our Christian Leader Community Coaching program. We have an easy-to-use online platform that has a full archive of courses, supportive community, live group coaching, and elements that are customizable specifically for your team. And I've personally seen the quick and enormous impact that it can have on a team of leaders who are focused together on learning and mastering the skills needed to grow their leadership effectiveness and enjoyment. And we want to be a part of that with you. We want to help you create and implement a plan. The community is very much affordable, but I would say that you can't afford not to have focused growth within your team. Your results heavily depend on it. So don't wait any longer. Let's do this together. Go to ryanfranklin.org and join Christian Leader Community Coaching today. I look forward to seeing you and your team inside the community. And now, back to our podcast.
It's my skill sets, my ability, my talent. But all of a sudden you get to this place where that, okay, wait a minute, am I going to settle for that, what I can generate? Or am I going to allow God to take me deeper? And that deeper requires a lot of sacrifice. It requires a commitment. It requires isolation. It's a lonely time, which is why I read another chapter on loneliness in leadership. But if you can make it through all that, then you experience convergence. And according to his research, again, only 1/3. So he talks about derailment, and derail does not mean that I fall off the bandwagon, so to speak. But I can derail in what God is wanting to do and move me forward. I can derail in that by just simply plateauing. And that's what really got me. And I think that's where most of the people, that's where we struggle, is that at some point in time we get comfortable and we start plateauing, which goes back to your question about stretch. But I really deal with that in that do, but don't forsake becoming.
My mind is going crazy with all that you're saying here. A transition from doing to being, how does that play into what you're talking about with us getting comfortable and I'm assuming, and this may tie into to the next subject that I want to talk about, and that's resilience. A little bit, if you want to kind of move into that, but I'm just curious how that plays into avoiding what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think they actually do. They do come together very, very well. You'll never get to where God wants to take you. Never be what God wants you to be without resilience. You got to be willing to stick through it. I'm reminded, and I've been ministering on these lines here the last year and a half, and man, I can't get away from it. It's like God just keeps working me over and over. That Joseph gets a dream, and the dream is that his brothers and fathers bowing down. But when the dream is fulfilled, he doesn't say, "Man, the dream is fulfilled." Instead, he says, "You meant it for harm. God meant it for good." And he says, "For the saving of many." And so what God was doing, Joseph gets this revelation at some point in the journey that what God was doing was much bigger than the dream. And man, I'll tell you, God gave me dreams. God has given me dreams. There were dreams that I've held on to, and I felt like God were taking those dreams away from me at times. Yeah. And yet, as he did with Abraham, he gives it back. And it's so much bigger. It's so much greater. And so I'm reading in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 3, and Paul writes, "I was with you in fear and weakness and much trembling." And I'm thinking to myself, now that doesn't fit the Apostle Paul. I mean, this is a dominant driver, type A personality. I mean, he's ready to take on anything. This is the guy, the boat goes down, and he gets back on a boat. I'm thinking, man, if I'm on a boat and it sinks, I ain't get back on a boat again. But the Apostle Paul, he gets back on the boat again 3 times. And he keeps getting back on boats, and he's whipped, 5 times and with whips and 3 times the rods. And the list goes on. And I'm like, so it doesn't seem to fit that he would be in fear. And yet when you go back, and I'm asking the Lord one day, and actually it was, I can almost tell you, I can tell you the weekend. It was the weekend of September the 2nd. And I'm of last year. And I was sitting in my house, and one of my best friends is sitting across from me. It's about 6:30 in the morning. Jason Gallion, who's vice president of IBC, very, very close friend. And I'm sitting there. I said, "Jason, look at this. This verse doesn't even fit." I said, Paul was talking about that it's the power of God. It's not with men's wisdom and man. It's the power of God and demonstration of the Spirit. And I said, then he says that he's in fear and weakness and trembling. I said, what's up with that? And all of a sudden, the Lord speaks to me, says, read Acts 16. And I go back and I start reading 16 and 17. I start reading 18. And by the time I got to 18, I can be a crybaby sometimes when God gets to moving. And I'm sitting there and God is moving and I just have tears running. I'm like, dear Lord. And because I saw myself in my own little world, that Paul goes in and he goes to Philippi and he gets beaten. He has a vision, but the vision and reality are not matching up. The vision is a man, come over and help us. When he gets there, there's no man. It's Lydia, a young damsel with the spirit of divination. And then there is finally a man, but he's not asking for help. He's putting Paul in bonds. And yet those are the founding members of the church of Philippi. But then he moves on and he goes to Thessalonica, gets ran out of town less than 4 weeks. He moves on to Berea. Thessalonican Jews come, they run him out of Berea, entice him up. He goes on to Athens, has very little success. And then he shows up in Corinth, and Corinth is this moral cesspool. And all of a sudden I saw it. Man, if that's been my track record, look what I'm getting ready to go through right now. But I don't have quit in me. I've got resilience. I keep showing up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm faithful. And yet, I'm a little fearful too. And so I'm looking at that. I'm going like, this is my life. This is my life. And I'm sitting there and Jason's sitting across from me. It's early in the morning. And the Lord spoke to me and said, keep on reading. And I went back to reading and I read chapter 18, I believe it was verse 10. And Paul received a second vision. And do not be afraid. Don't be fearful. Go on speaking, for I have many people in this city. And so you can see where I'm going with that, how it ties all that together. And that, man, I'm telling you, the Lord just speaks to me. Even as I'm speaking it right now, I feel it, it's just part of this crazy journey. And it pains me to see that most people never experience that. And then you have level 6, after convergence comes the legacy. That's the G.A. Mangan, the Vesta Mangan, the James Kilgore, the list goes on. These are the guys who they've done a lifetime of ministry and impacts far and wide. And there were others. There are people who I would say reach legacy portions who are not anywhere as well known, but in their own world, their own circle, they're definitely right there in legacy status. So I'm just now stepping into convergence the last couple of years, but I've had to go through a lot to get here.
You have said a lot in that, and my mind is going a lot of different directions. With there's a lot of nuggets in there. I guess I'm gonna have to get the book, or I've got a electronic copy of it, so I'll have to dive into it a little bit more, a little deeper to really flesh out those concepts. But so talking about concepts or chaos, managing chaos in your world. Obviously, that's where resilience comes into play. What's some practical steps that leaders can take? I mean, we've got leaders of all types listen to this episode that potentially could be right in the big middle of chaotic times where there's fear and various things that are coming against them in their as they endeavor to do the will of the Lord in their life. What's some practical steps that leaders can take to maintain their focus in the middle of those uncertain times or uncertain events in their life?
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning that. And I know that, and I should have prefaced, because when I started talking about the 6 stages, that is principle driven, and it is applicable for leaders of all types. And when I speak, I often talk about that. I will talk to business leaders about it. I'll talk to people in the church, because sometimes people hear the term church leaders or pastor, and they immediately think, oh, it's not applicable to me, but it's principle driven. And so you can definitely see it. So in relationship to your question, chaos, one, a very, very simple but very important key is just to understand that everything is not going to be perfect. It doesn't fit in a box. And I would guess if we do the DISC analysis, you probably are a C, a cautious contemplator. I may be wrong, but it's probably your personality.
It's been years since I've done the DISC, so I don't even know.
So it would be that you like things to be in order. You want it.
I'm very high gold nature, structured, high prudence.
Very structured.
Yes.
And then
I love my box.
Are you more detailed or are you more big picture? You're fast paced, 100 miles an hour?
I'm a rare combination of high vision, high big picture, but also structure and get things done.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. That's what I would have thought. I would think that you're a C, D, which is dominant driver, but you're a cautious contemplator. You have both, but you're probably more of a cautious contemplator and then a dominant driver. I'm completely opposite. I'm diagonal. I'm an aspiring influencer. I'm big picture, fast paced, people oriented. And then my secondary would be, I would be a dominant driver.
I could get we would work done. Well together.
We would work really well. My wife is a cautious contemplator. And so in my wife's world, everything needs to fit in its box. Everything needs to be proper. Every T's got to be crossed, I's dotted, and you got to follow the process. You got to follow the procedure. Yeah. Well, when you step into something that's new, that's just not how it is. It's often chaotic. And as God expands your territory, if you can't figure out how to manage more or deal with more stuff, like Joseph, from Potiphar's household, the prison, the palace, if you can't handle that, your God's not going to move you. And he may not have given you that skill set, or he may not have given you that, that calling in on your life. But if it is, then you've got to realize that, okay, wait a minute, I got to be okay with a certain amount of chaos. Mm-hmm. That's it's very simple, but it's so true. You have to be okay with a certain amount of chaos. Having said that, that speaks big time to the person who likes to put everything in the box and wants everything structured out. On the flip side of all that, for the person who is an I that doesn't really like the rules and processes, you're not going to be able to manage well. You're not going to be able to lead well if you don't figure out how to get some kind of structure in your life. You can only handle so much.
So,
because
can I interrupt
see where
you
I'm
here?
Going? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but let's go back. And this may tie into where you're going. I'm not sure where you're going with this, but so everything does need to fit in a box for me. It's stressful and energy draining when it doesn't. Now, I've learned well enough to know that I can figure it out and be okay for a season with the chaos. I've had to mature that side of me. It's sort of an integration of the good and the bad within me. But what's some what's some ways that I can overcome the fact that I've got to have everything in a box?
Well, I don't think you need to overcome it. I think you need to have the understanding that there is a season of time that it's going to be chaotic, and I can't kill my family. I can't kill my health. I can't kill my sleep. I'm going to have to function. And so you're going to have to sleep well. You're going to have to exercise. You're going to have time with your family. You have to time with the walk with God. And you can't get aggravated at everybody around you and mad because everything is not in its place. You have to have a goal that I'm going to move it here, but it's going to take me time. It may take me 6 months, but I'll get it there. I know where I'm headed, but I can't get frustrated right now because this is just part of my journey.
Yeah. So, what happens when we're to a person. You live with a person that likes things in a box. Yeah. So what happens when chaos comes and it's not in a box. The emotion can become overwhelming. Now, the same thing can happen even with somebody with your personality. But let's stay with me.
Yeah.
How can I
practical?
How can I overcome? So, is it emotional intelligence? Is it just being aware of that emotion?
Awareness would be a big part of it, but then you have to take action on some things. My wife was a special needs school teacher, and so in the environment that she was in, it could be very chaotic at times, and that's not who she is at all. So she actually printed out scriptures that would remind her, okay, this is what I need to be focusing on. And the peace, that God will give you peace. And then think on these things. And then she printed out a stop sign on a piece of paper, and she had it next to her desk. And when she felt that pressure, she'd reach over and she'd put her hand on that button. I say stop sign, but it had the button stop. And she'd put her hand on that piece of paper and push on it.
Yeah.
And then she'd look at the scriptures and she'd remind herself. And then another thing, very important.
So that she brought her structure into the midst of the chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing too, no, you're fine. Another thing she was really big on too was taking a walk, and every day she would take that walk. She had to like feed that area away from people. I have to get away from people. We had a patio. Yeah. She got a crazy bird feeder, not a bird feeder. She had bird feeders. She got a picnic table that would hold a piece of corn in the middle of it, and fed the squirrels. And so they'd come sit down at the picnic table, this little picnic table made for them, and pick the corn and eat the corn. And that became like this major stress relief in the midst of chaos. She became program chair of Christian counseling at Texas Bible College last year. My son got married last year in June. My daughter got married in September. And we moved from Katy to Lufkin. All that happened this summer while she was in her dissertation. And she kept it together. And so we're really big on vacation. And so we knew that right now it's going to be a lot of sacrifice. But we planned a 3-week mini sabbatical. And we took 3 weeks, 3 Sundays. And we got away and just replenished. And so we're really big on that.
That's good.
That was a big one. And she needs more downtime than I need. And, I get energized getting around people. She gets energized by being away from people.
Yeah.
And she would tell me, she goes, no, you need to step back. You're gonna burn out. I'm like, no, this is what I do to replenish, And so recognizing those differences was really, really big for us,
Yeah. I will say this as well. This is something that I love, some of those things, and I've got a few of those things in my life that I can go to kind of reduce the stress on my own, with prayer, the Lord helping me through things of that nature. But I also have built a life team around me, a couple of people that I can resource from. You mentioned one of your best friends. I built a team around me that I can resource from. If I'm not coming out of that by rest or the squirrels with the picnic table or the walk or the stop sign, if I'm not coming out with those things, then I've got to find help from someone. And that's where I resource from my life team. And that's been a vital thing for me as well.
That's excellent. And Carrie too, there's been a few friends that she can internalize and just move through things she doesn't have to have people. She doesn't have to talk. I need that. I want the interaction, but there have been people that know she does need it, but her daily operation, she's okay.
Yeah.
But we have people who have gotten to know her, that love her, that she loves. And she's got several of them that they will reach out. And there's one of my friends who actually, he gets Carrie through and through, and he'll get on the phone. He says, okay, we're going to talk. And then he'll just start quizzing her. And if needs to, she'll open up and share. And it's amazing. Usually it's when we're driving to the airport, it's an hour, 40-minute drive, and we'll schedule a call. And it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool to see. I'm thankful that the body of Christ makes a difference.
Oh, it makes a huge difference. There's over 60 scriptures, one another scriptures in the Bible.
Yeah.
And we need one another we need to resource from one another.
That's so true.
And that leads me to my next question related to your book. You mentioned you have a loneliness chapter. That's a significant theme in leadership. We were talking before we hit record and talking about this and some of the things that you and some groups that you're involved in have going to help with this sort of thing. But I see it over and over again with leaders that I coach. Talk about what you're seeing in regards to loneliness and a little bit about what you talk about in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to take a little different path here in a second, but then I'm going to bring it back around. When I was in Memphis, Tennessee, I was a family pastor, church about 600 or so people, and I just got on this path that God was taking me on, and I began to realize that nothing against anybody else, they're wonderful people, but my values were just taking me somewhere. I valued education. I valued just different things. And so it moved me down a path that's a little bit different. And man, I started realizing that, man, I'm lonely and I'm surrounded by people and I'm lonely. Yeah. And so I began to experience some of my deepest loneliness surrounded by a lot of people. And so out of that, I began to develop other friendships that went beyond the traditional norms, friendships that's because of technology, I was able to maintain, and they lived in other states and other areas. And so I that began to help me. It began to help me stretch, help me grow in areas. And then along that journey, I began to realize that, man, this isn't all bad. Again, I'm a people person. I lean that way. And I began to realize, man, this isn't all bad. This is driving me to new friendships. And then also it's driving me into a deeper relationship with God. And then it really came down to this, kind of going back to the doing versus becoming, is that I began to realize I don't need my affirmation from people. I don't need people to affirm me. I don't need people to validate me like I used to. That comes from my relationship with God. I'm confident and I feel very comfortable in who God has made me to be. I don't preach like everybody else. I have a very unique approach. Apparently, because I hear it all the time, that, oh man, that was so unique, and I'm comfortable just being me. And I admire others, honor them, but that's not me. And so I get to talking to a younger minister, a friend of mine, and he's bemoaning. He's not a people person, but he's bemoaning the fact that in his isolation, that he's lonely. And I tell him, I said, you need to learn to embrace it. I said, stop fighting it so much and see where God is taking you with it. Calls me back, 6 or so months later. He says, man, you are 100% right. And it's all about this validation and affirmation. And he began to find that more in what God was doing in his life. So that's what that main focus is. And I write also about affirmation, but that particular chapter, I'm focusing a little bit more on embrace it. But then I turn right around and I write, don't walk alone. And so, yes, there's a certain amount of you're going to lead and you need to be okay with some loneliness. Not everyone's you're not going to be able to have a conversation with everybody about everything, that you're going through. There may be a select few people, but you should never walk alone. Get someone, walk with somebody. And so they kind of balance each other out between the two. So
I know that there's a lot of dynamics involved with burnout, but would you agree or disagree? Fine if you would disagree, but loneliness is the number one cause of burnout, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that loneliness has a major factor in it. And I like the word loneliness for it, but maybe it's not so much a loneliness as aloneness.
Isolation, maybe.
Yeah. And I'm making up a word. I'm probably, but yeah, isolation where you don't have anyone to share with and carry the burden with and
to contain with.
Oh my word! Yeah,
to attune to someone to empathize with you.
Yeah, and you need to. It would be helpful to understand differences in people's personalities when it comes to that, because many years ago, I was going through a rough season, and I reached out to one of my closest friends, and it was like he didn't empathize with me, and I'm like, dude, I thought you were my friend. I need somebody to talk to, and so I had another friend, and I reached out and called him, and he actually helped me walk through this season. And but he was an S. He's a steady supporter. And he's a great listener. And I would just talk and talk. And I'm trying to, maneuver through everything by talking it out. And it dawns on me later that, wait a minute, my friend that I'm trying to pour all his feelings out on, he's a dominant driver, man. Dominant drivers, they don't have any feelings. They just go out and make everything happen. And that's not true. They actually do have feelings. But his personality is not as such, And so it goes back to the body.
I will say this. I agree with you that would be a natural instinct for a dominant driver person. But it can be learned. And I'm absolutely a person that has learned it. It's not easy, but it is. I do an assessment with the leaders that I coach called a CDR, and it rates their interpersonal sensitivity. Well, obviously, I've done it myself in the past, and I had a 9 of compassion out of 100. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm a pastor.
And your wife says,
counsel people.
And your wife says, I've been trying to tell you this.
My wife is 100%, so we're complete opposite in that.
I love it.
But
I love it.
It's so it can be learned, and it's necessary. I think to an extent, and that's one of the things in my book that chapter that I have written is increasing and utilizing the power of empathy in a leadership role, but it can be learned.
Absolutely. And I would have to say, my experience with dominant driver is that there is a place that is huge. You just don't see it. And that is, they are the champion for the underdog. If there is a need, there's a challenge, there's a problem, man, you want a dominant driver on your side, man, they will make a way. They will figure it out. They love the challenge, and they'll come to your rescue. And from that standpoint, man, that is a huge part. And I think I want someone not just to, cry, lay my head on their shoulder or pat me on the back, but I want someone to come alongside me and help make this thing happen. And man, they can make it happen.
Out. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And they can do that. So I have grown in my appreciation. And I talk a lot about the DISC, but whatever it is that you're looking at, if you don't even like personality assessments, just whatever it is, there's enough scripture that lets us know that there is a difference in how God made us. And I have a new appreciation for the body. I appreciate the body. I love the difference in skill sets. I wish I was more detailed oriented. I can't find my keys half the time. I wish I was more focused, I wish. And then I see people and I look at my wife and I'm like, babe, how do you do this? And she's like, I thought this is what everybody would do. And I'm just so frustrated that, that you're not doing this. I'm like, Carrie, I would never have that thought. I don't think like that. And I've had to learn, as you said, learn behavior. I learn and I'm better, but she's a natural. I'm just, I'm still learning. In those areas.
And the more we embrace that, the better teams that we build.
Oh,
I mean, the book of Acts is just full of team mentality.
Oh, amen.
It is full of organizational style building of a church.
Amen.
And the more we embrace that, the better the organization we're going to build, the better church we're going to build, and the more people we're going to reach.
Amen. I agree 100%. I'm a huge advocate for, Acts 6. And people say, well, structure is just a man thing. That's not a God thing. And I'm like, I don't know what Bible you're reading because you haven't read the Bible I'm reading.
Yeah.
I mean, there's structure there. There's a plan. Go back and read Moses and the tabernacle plan. I mean, tell me there's no structure. Tell me it doesn't matter getting things organized. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And people say, well, Jethro, he was an ungodly man. And I'm like, are you serious? Then what about when God tells Moses, okay, go choose 70 from amongst the leaders, and I'm going to take the Spirit upon you, giving away more of my book right now, 70, and I'm going to place it upon you. And I'm like, man, it just doesn't add up. And so hopefully it's just ignorance, just lack of knowledge, not just someone shunning scripture. I don't think that we try to shun scripture, but there's just so much there, man. The Bible is so rich, and God has fitly joined the body. I mean, all the pieces are there. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting sidetracked with all that, but I could talk for hours. We just need listeners who would want to listen to us.
That's right.
For 8 to 10 hours. I wouldn't have no trouble. I go to Asia and they go like, hey, can you teach for 7 or 9 hours? And I said, absolutely. Like, really? Like, most people don't do that. I said, well, I can. Let's go. Let's make it happen.
I did that recently in Australia, taught 8 times in 2 days.
I love it, man. I love it.
So one more subject I want to cover with you, and that's having a growth mindset, cultivating a growth mindset. How do people cultivate a growth mindset, and how do they balance their responsibilities and their personal growth?
Yeah. So one of the biggest ones there is kind of back what you were talking about a minute ago, your friends and awareness of what's around you. And that is self-awareness. You have to have self-awareness. And if you don't have self-awareness, you're really going to struggle. And so the question is, well, how do I get self-awareness? And one of the best ways to get self-awareness is to listen to the voices of the people who love you the most. And that's going to be, your spouse. If you're married, it's going to be your close friend. And if they continue to point out, oh, you're lacking in this area, you're lacking in this area, you're lacking in this area, then you may need to consider listening to what they're saying. And so when you begin cultivating that, that's a huge. I remember Daryl Johns said many years ago that the little fable with the emperor who wore no clothes. And he said that what's really crazy about it, he said, is that evidently he had created a culture in which those around him were afraid to tell him the truth. And so if you don't have that kind of environment of people around you to be able to tell you the truth, hey, man, you're missing this, you're missing that, or you need to grow in this area. So I think back to coaching. I know you do that, and I think that's a great way. And so you have to have that desire, like I want to grow, a willingness to change. I would even go back and trace it back to this, that if you lack humility, you're not going to grow. Forget ascension if you lack humility. If you think you have all the answers and everything's already together, then forget it. You're not, God's not even going to exalt you. I mean, you got to have humility, And so I think humility and then self-awareness and then very practical, ask the people around you. I remember years ago when I was pastoring in East Tennessee, I went to the closest friends and my wife and my father, and I said, what is the one area that I need to grow in order to be a better leader? And I asked about 6 people, and they all came back with the same exact answer. And so for a year and a half, I sought to grow in that area. And then I did the same thing, and I picked another area in my life, and I said, what is the one area that I need to grow in? I've done that for many years, and it has been a tremendous part of growth. And so, and then there are practical things like reading. It's hard to grow if you don't read. And I have friends who say, well, I hate reading. I'm like, but can you listen to a podcast? I mean, you've got to do something.
Listen to a book.
Yes, listen to a book. Read a short summary and really read it. Focus on it. I mean, those are practical things that you got to do. One of my favorite things to do is just to find the area that I'm really weak. And I don't want to when I say weak, I'm talking about a certain area of knowledge that I know that I need to grow in to be a little bit better at. And I will go at it and try to be a little bit better and put people around me like rhythm. Like I was talking about that. It was a desire to grow.
You mentioned that you're not a really structured person. What does your rhythm of growth look like in your life? How do you make sure that you have a good rhythm of growth? Do you kind of compartmentalize that over a week's time, daily time, or how does that look?
Yeah. So my nature is not to be structured. I like just to go with the flow and all that, but I've learned through time that doesn't work. So I am still structured, but I'm structured so I can have the freedom to do what I want to do at any given time, and have the flex in my life. But talking with someone that you worked closely with, and I'm sitting out in front of Starbucks in Memphis, Tennessee years ago, and I look at Terry Schock and I said, "Hey, man," I said, what do you do to put together your messages and all that? I said, "Because you're busy." And he goes, "Oh, well, look here." And he grabs his phone. He goes 3 years in advance and says, "Look right here." I look at a certain day. He's got blocked out time on his phone, his calendar, saying, "This is when I'm studying." And then he goes, shows him another day, and this is the time slot that I'm studying. So I time block. And I had to learn these things. But he was the first one to ever show me, bring exposure to something about time blocking. And I took that and began growing. And I applied it to my life even till today. I've got areas where I want to grow, and I've got time blocked on my calendar. And I started doing it more naturally out of necessity because I was going back to school as an adult. And so when I got into my master's, got into my doctorate, I realized I'm going to have to put 14 to 16 hours in on my master's. My doctorate, I was 24 to 26 hours, not counting the fact that I was full-time in ministry, 2 little children, and the list goes on and on. And so I slept about 4.5 hours a night, and I became structured in order to get things done. And even today, like writing a book, I do the same thing. I time block. And so my goal calls it the flexibility and then the chaos that happens. My goal is to get about 70% of what's on my calendar. And if I'm getting about 70%, then I'm able to move things forward. So I write a lot about it in rhythm, about how to structure things, your personal life. And I've been able to apply a lot of that. And I learn from people all the time. I'm always trying to pick up from other people.
Sounds like we just need to start with your first book and just kind of work through to this one.
Let's do it. And then let's do one of yours, and we'll just flip the role, and I'll be the guy asking the questions, and we'll talk about your book, and then we'll talk about the one you're going to write. You're doing these workbooks. I know you've got another book in you. And so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how to write, and we'll talk about the frustrations along the way.
That would be a good podcast episode is how to write. That would be tremendous. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
How do you put it together? Oh, I love talking about it too. And it's so much fun.
As we wrap this subject up, what's one key takeaway that you would hope listeners would remember from our conversation today?
Oh, man. If I, in all sincerity, number one on my list, don't stop growing. Just don't stop. Get back up. You get knocked down, get back up. Do this thing again. You get hurt, that's part of life. God allows those things to, God allows it. And so get back up. See, what's God trying to do? What's God trying to bring out of it? Where's God taking it? Can you see beyond the immediate and see a future that it's bright, man? It's bigger than what you can think. And keep moving. Keep moving. Number one takeaway.
Awesome. Well, in conclusion, these are just some final questions. Can be related to this subject, but doesn't have to be. What's your biggest challenge or obstacle in leadership right now in your life?
Oh, man. I think the biggest one is what I just said. I look at the challenges, and I can talk about, Bible college, you can talk about budgets, you can talk about personnel, you can talk about student ratio and enrollment, and all the things that are typical in a Bible college setting. Or I could look beyond all that and go like, no, there's something else. And that is, can I see the vision? Can I see where God's taking us? Can I articulate that? Can I overcome those challenges? And I say I'm talking about God, And I think that probably the biggest one there is that is making sure that I do my part, that I'm a good steward of what God has entrusted me with. Am I faithful with the small things? And then am I allowing God to do his thing? Or am I so frustrated in the other areas that are really God things that God's like, I don't want you to worry about that. And that's that balance that I constantly try to keep myself in. I say, wait a minute, that's a God thing. What can you do? What can you steward? It's in your hand. And then see that on down the road where it's going. Do not despise the day of small things. Yeah. So at the Zerubbabel, you're going to hold the plumb line. That mountain of rubble is going to become a plain. When it's all said and done, you're going to be put that cornerstone on amid the shouts, grace, grace. God did it. And it's not by might nor by power, but you're going to have to do something. And so I have to do that. I've got these books I want to write. I have to be diligent. I got to be resilient. I got to write. And it won't happen if I don't stay with it. But at the same time, there's this major God factor. And so I'm not answering your question real clear. I know that I'm talking in a circle with it, but I know what I'm trying to say.
No, that's good.
I know what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, no, that's good. But speaking of those small things, you do a lot of things. You're a Bible college president. You do leadership retreats on the weekend. You preach. You write books.
Yeah.
You coach people. You do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So speaking of small things, what's one small ritual or routine that helps you do all of those things?
My
do what
morning.
You do.
I love my morning. I get up
Your
early.
Morning.
Yeah. It's my
that
favorite
like?
part of my day. When I'm in my rhythm, and sometimes because of travels and time zones, and I'll get out of rhythm a little bit. But when I'm really clicking really well, I'm getting up at 4:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
By 5 o'clock, I'm sitting down in my chair. I've got a lap desk. I've written every book from a lap desk. I love having a lap desk, my computer. I've got my Bible program open. I'm reading scripture. I'm making notes. God's just talking to me. I've got a stack of books right next to me. I'm grabbing those books and I'm going from a variety of books and I'm reading those books. And I'm spending about an hour and a half in the morning doing that. If I got time, depending on how soon I have to be at the school, I like to spend about another 45 minutes writing. And when it's all said and done, the day takes off and it goes, and you just never know. Like tonight, I've got a special thing at the school. I won't get done until 10:30, 11 o'clock. I've got dinner with my daughter and son-in-law for their 1-year anniversary. Got some things I got to do at the house. When it's all said and done, that morning time, dude, it cures me. It cures me. Starts my day off the right way. And if I recognize in that morning, God, what is that you're saying to me? And today, the old song, draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm playing that song. My wife is sitting across from me in the living room. She's got her computer open. She's reading scripture. And I'm just listening to the song, and I'm reading. And I get to the campus, and I start walking to a chapel. And a more modern song comes to me, and Fred Hammond's song, just to be close to you, just to be close to you. Walk into the chapel, bang, feel the presence of God. As I'm saying it, I feel it. That's my morning. That comes on my morning, and I love my mornings.
Doesn't matter what your day may behold, if you can swing back to that morning ritual, it keeps everything kind of moving in rhythm.
So true.
Yeah.
So true. Took me years to develop that. Took me years.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for my mornings.
Well, Dr. Wilson, this has been such a tremendous conversation, and I greatly appreciate your time today. You giving it to me and to our audience. Appreciate you doing that. And if people want to connect with you in some way, I'm sorry?
I said it's an honor.
Thank you. If people want to connect with you in some way, where can they find you?
Yeah, find me at info@equippingleaders.net. Info@equippingleaders.net. That's I'm pretty good about answering my emails. If I miss it, then someone needs to email me back in about 2 to 3 days, because I've totally missed it, because I'm pretty good about staying on top of all of it.
Okay. I'll definitely put that in the show notes, and someone wants to reach out to you about your book or whatever,
thank you.
They can get you to info@equippingleaders.net.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Man, it's been a pleasure.
It's been awesome.
Pleasure.
Been awesome.
Let's do it again.
We do need to. We need a part 2.
Let's do it.
And so this concludes our show today. My name is Ryan Franklin. Thank you so much for joining us on the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast.